Okay, so members, for the avoidance of any doubt, we are now broadcasting on YouTube. We are almost like New Year's Eve, counting down the seconds till 6:30. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning and Development Board. Members, it's my very sad duty before we start to formally say that I'm very sad to hear that Councillor Dawn Downs, who is a very well-known and respected member of the council and of this board, has passed away. I'm sure everyone who knew her is incredibly saddened by that. I certainly am. Members, if you would stand for a moment's silence in her memory. Thank you very much. Members will now move on to the formal agenda. First item is apologies for absence or members of own council business. Does anyone have anything? Do you have any apologies?
None received, Chair.
Item number 2 is disclosable pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Councillor Dervix.
Thank you. I'd like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 4C, is the Hart Quarry application, on the grounds that I am the vice chair of the regulatory board at the county, and I suspect this will be coming back to them as well.
Thank you, Councillor Dervix.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any items to disclose? Thank you, members. We now move on to the minutes of 2 previous meetings held on the 7th of December and 21st of January. Members, are you happy that I signed them as a true and correct record on your behalf?
So moved, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I don't think we need a recorded vote, Mr. Tobin.
Chair, if there's no issues raised, then we can take them as read.
Thank you very much. Members, now we move on to the planning applications for consideration tonight. The first one is number 89 to 91 Main Street, Orstry. We have no external speakers, so Mr. Brown, would you like to introduce your report?
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go straight to the slides. These are replicas of what you see in your papers in any event, but the location, this is Main Road, Orstry. The shop is down here. The Baptist Church, which is referred to in the report, is here. The properties that are referred to as 89 and 91 are this area here, as you can see, 89 and 91. The application site is quite a large site. It's the red line, which I'm outlining now, together with the access. The property is this L-shaped building here, which is supposed to be converted. And then the access, which is referred to in the committee report, is this line down through here. Flats Lane is here, and the access is onto Main Road. That's the existing elevations of the property, and that is what's proposed, just a few extra openings. So, Mr. Chairman, I just need to outline or give a bit more detail in respect to the introduction. This application hasn't been determined yet, and in view of its non-determination, the applicant has lodged an appeal with the Secretary of State. So therefore, the Secretary of State will now become the determining authority in this particular case. Clearly, the inspector who's appointed by the Secretary of State will want to know the council's view on the application, and therefore this application, this report is brought to you tonight as if we had been the determining authority. And as you can see from the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, it'll be to seek to declare a position for our position for the content of our case when it goes to the Secretary of State. The second introductory remark I need to make is the report refers to main modifications, proposed main modifications. Those have only just been published. They were published on last Thursday. They are referred to in all of the committee reports that you have on your board agenda tonight. However, this report covers main modifications which are now out of date because they dealt with those particular modifications before publication. Now, I sent a note around last week outlining what the refresh main modification numbers were. That also went to the applicant. So therefore, I don't intend to go through the report, Mr. Chairman, identifying what's what. Members will have had my note on that. However, I do need to make the point that in the recommendation, the main modification on the papers refers to MM63. That should be MM74. So if the recommendation is adopted, Mr. Chairman, that should be the name modification that should be referred to in that particular refusal. And therefore I changed my recommendation to take account of that. I don't intend to go through the report, Mr. Chairman. The matters are all there. Several people have commented on the development boundary issue. The site is outside the development boundary, but on page 4A3 under B, the principle of the proposal, I've outlined why that at the present time carries little weight. I've been through all the other potential harms in the remainder of the report, and the key one here is the highway issue. The Highway Authority has objected. I would support that objection on the grounds that the highway comments refer to visibility and the access arrangements which you saw on the plan, which I showed to you earlier, being substandard. And that would tie in with the NPPF requirements to do with road safety if you are considering a refusal. So, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is as printed, apart from the modification being MM74 rather than MM63.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Members who would like to start the conversation? Councillor Humphreys.
Chair, I agree with what Mr. Brown has said. We stick to our guns in most cases when it comes to stuff outside the development boundary. It is, knowing the area, it is going to be a problem on the back lane there. And so I'm happy to move the recommendation as the papers are at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm happy to second that, Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Could I just check with you both with you once when that you're happy with the amended recommendation noting the different modification?
Absolutely.
I'm happy.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak? In which case it's been proposed and seconded for refusal. Mr. Tobin, could you take a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bell?
For.
Councillor Clues?
For.
Councillor Deakin?
For.
Councillor Dervis?
For.
Councillor Hayfield?
For.
Councillor Humphreys,
4,
Councillor Jarvis,
4,
Councillor Lees,
4,
Councillor MacDonald,
4,
Councillor Mawson,
4,
Councillor Moss,
4,
Councillor Parsons,
4,
Councillor Phillips,
4.
Councillor Simpson.
4.
Unanimous, Chair.
So members, even by my maths, that's carried for refusal. We now move on to application number 671 for land opposite the Village Hall, Station Road, Whittaker Heath. We have Mr. Thwaites as the speaker. Mr. Thwaites, if you could stand by, please, while Mr. Brown introduces the report. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say firstly that Mr. Thwaites has circulated a letter together with some photographs over the weekend to all planning board members. I just need to report on that, and also to say that that letter and the photographs have also been sent to the applicant in order that he can see what's being said. Mr. Thwaites may refer to that particular document in his speech, and that's entirely up to him. In terms of the plans then, Mr. Chairman, can move on. This site is the rectangular site that you see here. Station Road runs north to south. Cottage Lane runs along here with the right angle bend here. The Village Hall, Nether Whittaker Village Hall, is on the opposite side of the road here. And there is also the club buildings that are here, former club buildings here, as I should say, now residentially developed by 9 units, known off a cul-de-sac off Tame View. But the application site, as you can see, is that rectangular piece of land. The access, this is the only plan we have in relation to access, is to be off Station Road opposite the hall. So, Mr. Chairman, if I go back to the report, again, as far as the introduction is concerned, this is an appeal against non-determination has been lodged with the Secretary of State, and therefore we're in the same position as we were on the last item in declaring a position so that the Secretary of State or the inspector appointed by him will know what the Council's view is on the application as if we had been the determining authority. There's also an added difference here in that this is a major application. In excess of 1,000 square metres is likely in terms of floor area, and therefore the 2009 direction applies. So that means that had we been minded to resolve this application, it would have had to be referred to the Secretary of State in any event. We could free to refuse, and if an appeal had been lodged, it would have ended up with the Secretary of State. So by whatever means, I suspect this application would have ended up with the Secretary of State. In terms of the main modifications, Mr. Chairman, these are the correct ones in this report. So all the MM numbers in here are the correct ones that have been published last week by the Council. The main modifications do not affect the Greenbelt allocation for this particular site. The site is in the Greenbelt. The main modifications do not alter that whatsoever. And you'll see from my report on pages 4B, 16 and 17 that I've gone through the MPPF requirements as to whether this is appropriate or inappropriate development. It could well have been appropriate development because it is for affordable housing and it is adjacent to the village. However, when all the factors are taken into account as recorded in the MPPF, as supplemented by our development plan policies, and my view is that it does not meet the definitional requirement of appropriate development. In terms of actual Greenbelt harm, then paragraph 915 on 4B18 runs through the issues that are involved. I consider it does create actual Greenbelt harm, and that harm is substantial. We then go through all the other potential harms, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not going through those, but you can see from there that there are several which have been identified. Quite a few of the representations that have been received have referred to flooding impacts, and you can see from the section 5 on 4B21 that this in fact generated a lot of interest with the applicant as well. and amended and updated flood risk assessments had to be produced. Those have gone off to both the Environment Agency and the Leeds Local Flood Authority as our technical consultees on these matters, and both have come back with no objections subject to conditions. I've included those consultation responses in the report attached as appendices, and they have to carry substantial weight, Mr. Chairman. They are your statutory consultees on flooding and drainage issues. Then on page 4B23, on paragraph 943, I've summarised all the harms. And you remember, Mr. Chairman, when looking at a greenbelt issue, you have to assess a planning balance between the harms on one side, other considerations on the other. The harms are cumulative harms, and they're outlined on 943. As far as the applicant's considerations on the other side of the balance are concerned, then these are outlined in section 10, and then my assessment of the final balance is in section 11. And the test that you have is set by the NPPF. In other words, the planning considerations put forward by the applicant have to clearly outweigh the cumulative harms. If you consider that they do, then they will amount to very special circumstances are necessary for you to support this application. My view is that they don't, for the reasons given in section 11, and that in fact is supplemented in the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, with the 4 potential reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Thwaites, Mrs. Thwaites as well. Welcome to the meeting.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you. Mr. Tobin will explain the way speaking works, so I'll hand over to him. Mr. Tobin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Thwaites. As indicated, in a moment you'll be given 3 minutes in which to address the board in relation to the application. I will tell you when your time starts, and I'll give you a reminder when you have 1 minute remaining. Okay. Your time starts now.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. 15 months ago, 302 people signed the Save Our Greenbelt campaign with 139 formal objection letters that were lodged. So from a small Category 4 village, it's obvious how apprehensive people are with this proposal. And now that's likely to continue for another year with the referral to the Secretary of State. We concur with the overwhelming recommendation made by Development Control to refuse planning permission on this greenbelt. This greenbelt is a long-standing agricultural piece which provides a key space with views over open countryside when you enter Whittaker Heath. Cottage Lane runs along its edge, enabling residents of all ages to walk through the heart of the village, away from traffic, enjoying these open views and appreciating nature and sharing family time. It's part of our village fabric. This field is not infill. It is open on the west, the south, and half the eastern side. Greenbelt is rightly protected by the NPPF and your policies, and distressingly, I believe we've now lost in excess of 10% of our greenbelt locally through HS2, with more to come from the Wall of Prayer and the Surf Park. Boris Johnson confirmed in the Commons last week, sadly, that UK greenbelt was now only 12% of UK land. He said it should be protected and that we can fulfil our building programmes across the country using brownfield sites, he said. More than important than ever to protect our green-built spaces from opportunistic development. The Whittaker Heath Sustainability Index stands at 19, and as a contrast, Atherson sits at 144 and Coleshill 93, which are far more attuned to sustainable development of this type. I try and understand why we might think it's a good idea to build 30 affordable houses and permanently destroy this piece of greenbelt. We have no shop.
1 minute remaining.
No shops, no longer a post office, no doctors, no schools, no regular public transport, and no demonstrable local housing need. You have to have a car. So this can't be considered a long-term sustainable solution. So if it's not in the interest of the residents or the village, or for its future on the countryside, what is it for? Is the motive simply profit? If so, that's not a substantial reason for causing irreparable permanent harm to this area of greenbelt. It's precious. There's no going back if we do it. Greenbelt development is our significant issue here. However, there are other issues too. Highways, flooding, destruction of hedgerows and trees, and the destruction, more importantly, of a village community. Surely there is only one conclusion today, and that is to send a unanimous rejection and protect our greenbelt for now and for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thwaites. Members, who'd like to ask any questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Thwaites. You talk about destruction of the village community. Exactly what do you mean by that, please?
It's quite a complicated thing. I think there's several elements to it, Judy. I think the greenbelt and the environment are linked together. And I've mentioned about the greenbelt, but kind of when you consider it, what do people do in a village that has very few amenities? They like to cycle, they walk as families, they're on their own with their dogs, with their pushchair, and they lose all those views of openness. This kind of development is urbanising. It's going to damage the parish ruralness, and it's why people come to the village in the first place. Incidentally, our 4 children don't want to stay in a village. They want to go to towns because there's plenty going on. So there's different reasons why people come here. And that is linked to the environment. So if you lose your hedgerows, your trees and your wetlands, this high habit distinctiveness, I think, is what the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust calls it. It's really significant to the environment that we're in. And then if you consider, if we did do a development like this, and Mr. Brown has said, it's in excess of 1,000 square metres of floor space, imagine the noise, the traffic, the air pollution, the dust from doing something like that. So that's one bit. And then I think the other 2 elements, one is safety, and this is associated with traffic. So if you increase the size of the village by 20%, which is what this is talking about, maybe 90 people, 60 cars, where do all those cars go? If it's like Tame View, they've got one in a garage and one on the road, but everyone fills a garage full of stuff. So they tend to go on the road. So we also lost a car park with the development of Tame View. So, over the last few years, we've got more cars, we've got more traffic going through the village because it's now a rat run. Footpaths get blocked, there's dangerous parking. So, and that's going to increase with HS2 and the hub. So, that all affects the residents, this community feel. There'll be 4 entrances in a few yards, and I think the plan that Jeff put up shows that, including the bend. So that must compromise safety of the village residents and the community. When cars are pulling out and people are crossing on foot, it's difficult at times now. So I've not seen any evidence presented that it's safe, and I think that's why the highway's objective. And then the last piece to me would be the most significant bit. This is this visual character of the village and the community. So development control referred to the traditional setting of the village landscape in fairly flat surroundings. So now the new houses would need to be built 5 feet above the existing ones. 5 feet. So how can that be part of blending into what is already there? And the development call referred to expansion and extension of the village spatial limits. Now that totally changes the characteristics of the village, which in turn directly affects its population. So the way we see it here in the village, our sense of community would be ripped apart. We're all dead proud of the village we live in and the parish. So this would be a self-contained add-on, and it's hard to see how that could connect with the existing community. And to show the feelings, I think that's why the villagers were united to try and stop this and protect what we have. And they put lots of reasons in those letters. Even a scheme to crowdfund to try and buy the land, to put it into trust to stop it being developed. And that land has been grazed for over 100 years. 3 or 4 owners now, we can trace going back to 100 years. It's had cattle on it, it's currently horses. So it's good history and we feel it should be maintained. So I think to sum it up, there would be so much loss to the village and its history if this went ahead. And that's what I mean by destruction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Thwaite, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I've just got one question. You did mention that there is no demonstrable housing need, and you did say that your 4 children don't want to stay in the village. But are there not other people who have families that would like to stay local, and having affordable housing gives them an opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's fair observation. I don't think anyone disagrees that we do need affordable housing. It's about kind of where it is. So, if you were working through it, North Warwickshire's got 6.4 years of housing supply on brownfield sites without developing greenfield. So that's the first point. This isn't small scale. It represents a 20% increase in the village. So now, when you look back and you try and look for demonstrable need, the only thing we can find really is a 2014 survey, which shows a requirement of 11, of which 6 were affordable and 5 were open market. Now, the Dog Lane appeal, which the council rejected, there was only 2 on the waiting list there, so the appeal was dismissed. So that kind of says there. Then I think the development control report from the council housing officer in January this year, it had 20 who said they'd like to reside in the parish. There's a big difference between reside and wanting to reside and physical need. So there's not actually been any evidence produced that shows that. And then I think linked to that is the sustainability score of the village, which is now at 19. And I have mentioned this. So, if you bring a lot of new residents into the village, they do need to thrive. And given the lack of facilities, I just don't feel it would be fair on them. They have to have cars. There isn't the stuff to do here. Our children, which you mentioned, they don't want to be here because it's not easy to get about. There's no fast food takeaways. There's no shops. There's no nightlife. There's poor internet. So for young people, I'm not sure it's great anyway. And then maybe a final point, I think, is that housing is increasing in the village anyway, organically. So with the Whitaker Garden Centre and Tame View, that's added 34 properties. And, I personally know of another 6 that have been done. And I think there's 10 applications approved, which are waiting to be built. So, we're getting natural organic growth. And that's in a sustainable way. It's in an appropriate way and it fits in. But I think even with that, and they haven't shown any of it, but if there was a local need, that's not in itself sufficient, really, to provide a very special circumstance to outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. Hopefully that's a heartfelt.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Humphries. You're mute, Councillor Humphries.
I'm on mute. It's very unusual. Okay. You mentioned flooding. Can you explain that a bit further, especially that the Environment Agency and the Flood Authority have not produced any objections? So I wonder if you can outline your issue. Thank you.
I mean, it's no surprise, given the content of the 139 letters, that they kind of disagree with the EA and the FA, because everyone mentioned it, so we're all quite anxious about it. I think, the facts are, we're on a floodplain, zone 3. We're in a flood warning area, we're at high risk of flooding, and it runs alongside the River Tame. So in the Dog Lane appeal, which I mentioned earlier, the developer tried to promote using Dog Lane because this site was inappropriate for building because of flood risk. So, literally 3 or 4 years ago, it wasn't appropriate then because of the flood risk. So that's one thing. I think when they built Tame View on the brownfield site there, on the old clubhouse, which is only 9 houses, most of the people in the village are reporting an increase in surface water. It might be coincidental, but it might not. But that we're talking about doing 30 houses. Now, I know since Tame View was done, one resident has to pump water out from under his floorboards when that field floods. Another, which is actually me, I've had to dig ditches to take the water away from around the house. That field at certain times is often underwater, and it's kind of a bit of a joke now that the ducks actually consider it a pond, and there's lots of pictures around it. So that's kind of the fact, but I think the wider context of flooding is that when one change is made somewhere, there's always a corresponding impact somewhere else. So, they've rightly built the flood bank, and a lot of people think actually, well, water tables are a little bit worse. So If with that in mind, so if you're going to build all of these houses, they say, well, we'll put them 5 feet above road level. But what about the existing residents that aren't 5 feet above road level? And it doesn't seem to be that there's any account taken of what's there now. So, I think that's an area to explore. I think HS2 development is going to massively increase, and with the hub, and we've always said there's consequential impacts from doing that. What contingency has been put in for rapid changes in climate? So it just feels it's folly to build on floodplains when we don't need to. And I think maybe the final piece is the amended flood risks report was paid for by the developers. So we don't feel it delivered a balanced view. What if one of those calculations is wrong at this stage? And bear in mind the house designs haven't been done. Who suffers and where is the risk? It's with the residents of the village. And once it's built, there's no going back. So, one of the things we thought about was having a post-development review of Tame View, which might help drive future decision-making and policy development. So I think there are a number of doubts and concerns which really scare people, to be honest.
Thank you. Members, does anyone else have any questions for our speaker? In which case, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Thwaites.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Deakin, was that a question or a speech?
I've got a question to Jeff Brown. Can you just clarify what the recommendation is for me? I've confused myself whilst looking at the board papers. So if you could just clarify the recommendation for me.
Yeah. Just go back to what I said at the beginning, Councillor Deakin. The Secretary of State is the determining authority here, not us, because of the appeal being lodged. The Secretary of State will want to know what our position is in this appeal. So therefore, the recommendation is that had we been the determining authority, my recommendation would have been to refuse. And that's set out in the recommendation. So if the board considers that had it been the determining authority, it would have refused, it'll run with this recommendation or amend the recommendation. If it disagrees, then it will have to say that the recommendation is that it would have been minded to approve the development as proposed.
Okay.
Are you okay with that, Councillor Deakin?
Well, yes, I am. I'm happy with the answer. Obviously, I won't be voting for the recommendation, but I'm happy with the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'll move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Any other comments? I just have two questions for Mr. Brown, if you don't mind, members. The first one, Mr. Brown, in section 10, you talk about paragraph 10.2, our housing supply, and I'm quite clear in my own mind that we're above 5%, and I can see the statistics. Do we have a current numbers to how far we are into that, how safely within the 5% we are?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As part and parcel of the proposed modifications that went off to the inspector last week, there was an updated housing supply figure. And our figure in that report that went to the inspector is 6.2 years.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That's certainly good news. And as one of the two local members, and somebody who used to live in Wittergate, I have to say I'm pretty shocked at the Environment Agency's comments on flooding. I have personally seen that field flood significantly, and I am quite surprised that having built a flood bank around the village and talked about the importance of protecting floodplains, that the Environment Agency is still saying that this is okay. Can I just check with Mr. Brown? They got that right. They didn't get this field mistaken for another one somewhere that's not in a floodplain.
Oh no, Mr. Chairman. I mean, the applicant and the case officer who's dealing with this have dealt with this extensively. And apart from this letter, there's quite an exchange of correspondence before that, leading up to this particular position from the Environment Agency. So no, the Environment Agency has not got the wrong site.
Well, I take your comments to heart, Mr. Brown. We have to have due consideration to the Environment Agency's comments, but it is stretching credulity to give them sufficient respect, I have to say. Members, it's been proposed by Councillor Hayden for refusal in line with the recommendation. Is there a seconder for that?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak? In which case we'll go to a vote. Mr. Toby.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bell?
4.
Councillor Clues?
4.
Councillor Deakin?
Against.
Councillor Dervis?
4.
Councillor Hayfield?
4.
Councillor Humphreys?
4.
Councillor Jarvis?
4.
Councillor Lees?
4.
Councillor MacDonald?
4.
Councillor Mawson?
4.
Councillor Moss?
4.
Councillor Parsons?
4.
Councillor Phillips? Councillor
4.
Councillor Phillips?
4.
Councillor Simpson?
4. Members, again, that's all but unanimous, 1 against, so that recommendation is carried, and had we been the determining authority, we would have been refusing. Thank you, members. We now move on to, so I'm just flicking through my pages quickly, to the next item, which is application or consultation items number 1, 2 and 3 for Hartsell Quarry, Nuneaton Road, Nuneaton. Mr. Brown.
Well, as you can see from the report, Mr. Chairman, we've been consulted on 3 applications that have been submitted to the County Council's Minerals Authority in respect of works by the operator there at Hartsell Quarry. One of the applications is to retain existing plant and equipment close to the entrance, and the other 2 are in fact to vary the main quarry consent to allow for reprocessing of some spoil earlier than anticipated, and also the plant and equipment that goes with that particular operation. Let me just run through the plans so that we can see the sites. So, Mr. Chairman, this is the first application. This is the one for the retention of the existing plant and machinery. The Nuneaton and Manchester roads are here. The main West Coast main line is down through here, and the road, Atherton Road, that comes up through Hartsell is here. The quarries are here, as you can see, and this is the Anchor Hill. So the application to retain the plant and equipment is on this red land here, which is the existing area where there is a lawful use for that particular use in activity in any event, and that's the range of equipment which I've referred to in the committee report. You can see it's spread over quite a large area. And then to just half a dozen photographs, because this is a retrospective application. This is typical of what you would see at any particular quarry site. The second application is for the reworking of some spoil, and that spoil is here with marked in this red-shaped piece of land. The previous application is this area here, and as you can see from the report, this in fact spoil was to be reused for the restoration of the quarry in its latter phases. Because of the particular upgrade in technical know-how now, the quarry operator reckons it will be viable to rework this particular spoil and extract material from it, and he wants to do that early within phase 1 of the proposal, and that's the reason for the variation, because this would have taken place in phase 4 as part of the restoration scheme. As I say in the report, Mr. Chairman, this particular material would have been moved in any event. It's just a question really of bringing it forward, which is the issue here. And then the plant and materials that are connected to that spoil working is there. The spoil working was down here just to the south of it, and you can see here the first application site that I referred to. And this is the spoil, the materials and equipment for the working of that particular spoil, and together with, again, a cross-section through. So, Mr. Chairman, if I can go back to the report, I've gone through each of the three proposals. In terms of the retention of the existing plant and equipment, then that is on a part of the site which is lawful for that activity in any event. There's a certificate of lawfulness on that site. So there's the matter is already agreed in principle. In terms of the others, then the main application is really for the variation to work that spoil. And that is something which we should be supporting in any event because of sustainability. In other words, you rework spoil rather than extract new material. In this particular case, that reworking does not involve any explosives or blasting. It is just washing through the material and extracting material. The key things from my point of view, Mr. Chairman, are that, first of all, the cumulative impacts of all of this. And you can see the comments from the environmental health officer in that, and basically he would look at me as strengthening some of the dust management plans and other plans that could be associated with this. And those comments have gone off to the County Council. And then also the applicant has recognised that the housing development, which is close by to the Hartshill Quarry, and which members are familiar with, the tarmac application for up to 382, although not determined, it's on allocated land within the emerging plan, and the applicant has recognised that as being a sensitive receptor. So therefore, he has taken account of that in his assessments of noise and dust, and that's significant, but not only for this application, but also for the tarmac application when that comes back to you. So you see, Mr. Chairman, from the conclusions in paragraph 8.7, I'm suggesting no objections, but asking the County Council to consider several issues there. The first is that the applicant has actually committed to carrying on phase 1 before he carries on phase 2. So therefore, this application is not to vary the overall phasing of the quarry. And as I say, point 2 there is the operations to rework the spoil heap should take place solely within phase 1 and not be left to a later phase. And then the normal conditions that you'd expect to see in terms of working hours and dust management plans. And just a final point there on 8.8, the proposed modifications to the emerging plan do not alter anything in that particular recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Members who'd like to start the discussion? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. Rather unusually for a local member, I'm going to be enthusiastic about a quarry application, planning application. This is actually a benefit to the community, in my view. And in fact, the quarry owner consulted with local members and with the parish council before he submitted these applications to Warwickshire County Council and gave a really good explanation as to why these proposals were, he needed to put them forward. So in terms of the existing ancillary buildings, one of those is a building for the welfare of the workers on the site, and that was missing before. So I would really welcome that would be able to stay there because we need that facility. And as Mr. Brown said, the other two things are linked: working the spoil heaps, as I call them, and having the equipment to do that is fantastic, because if it means that the blasting is going to be reduced, then of course we'll all be very enthusiastic about it. So, and the final point is it does give us an opportunity to strengthen the dust management plan, which Mr. Brown's mentioned there. And again, that will be welcomed by the community. So I'm very happy to support and indeed to propose the recommendations from Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Would anyone else like to speak? I'm certainly happy to second Councillor Bell's recommendation from the chair. If no one else wishes to speak, Mr. Tobin.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bell.
4.
Councillor Clues.
4.
Councillor Deakin.
4.
Councillor Hayfield.
4.
Councillor Humphreys.
4.
Councillor Jarvis.
4.
Councillor Lees,
4.
Councillor MacDonald,
4.
Councillor Mawson,
4.
Councillor Moss,
4.
Councillor Parsons,
4.
Councillor Phillips,
4.
Councillor Simpson.
4.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that's carried. Thank you, members. We now move on to application, not application, agenda item number 5, the government consultation on the new national model design, national modern design code. Mr. Brown.
I've got not a lot to add to the report, Mr. Chairman. This was quite a substantial document, and I circulated the link to it to members beforehand so that they could have a good look through it. From our point of view, from both myself and from Dorothy's point of view, this is welcome. It's very general, it's a bit urban oriented, but as members will have appreciated from the Local Development Framework Subcommittee a couple of weeks ago, we've already taken this up. And we are producing or have produced a draft design code for North Warwickshire, and I've started looking at using this in terms of master planning for our strategic sites. So we're quite well advanced in this respect, and therefore we will use the opportunity to comment on design codes as we go through with planning applications. The second half of the consultation was to update the NPPF. First of all, to take account of the National Design Code, and then secondly, to introduce other items which have come through as a result of discussion at government level. And those are outlined mainly in paragraph 3.6 of the report. There's half a dozen there, which are of particular note. We're talking about flood risk, Mr. Chairman, in one of the previous items. The first item there under 3.6 is that residual flood risk should be dealt with through green infrastructure rather than through engineering operations such as underground storage tanks and that kind of thing. Green infrastructure is our swales and the kinds of low ponds and lakes that we have as a result of drainage issues. An interesting one under 2 is that an expectation that all new streets should be tree lined. I think that is perhaps a bit optimistic, but certainly that's already been taken up in terms of one of the policies in the emerging local plan, where we're looking for more tree planting in an urban area or in a residential estate. Article 4, directions to be tightened. That's of no surprise whatsoever. That's what's been aired for some time. Clarification that in all major residential developments, a minimum of 10% of the total number of houses should be affordable. Again, there's nothing new in that. That's bringing matters up to date. And then number 5 is Mr. Jenrick, Robert Jenrick, has mentioned this in the press and has led on this, and it's now being transferred through to the NPPF to do with retention of historic statues and plaques. We'll have to look in. I've asked a couple of officers to look to see what we might have in the borough in that respect to deal with those when they crop up. I've also included in the report, Mr. Chairman, the actual consultation letter on the NPPF, which goes through a whole host of questions on the various sections and changes to the NPPF. And officers really have got no comments on those, and they're very general. But I'm quite happy to take anything from members, Mr. Chairman, and report back to the government as part of its consultation exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Members, any comments or questions for Mr. Brown? Always report. I have to say, Mr. Brown, just on that final point on statues, to the best of my knowledge, almost all the statues within the borough are modern and have been put in place within the last 20 years. And I'm delighted that this authority, through its various political administrations, has actually encouraged modern statuary. It would be lovely to have some old stuff as well, but I'm keen that we continue to have modern developments in this area as well as just protecting the past. Members, my own view on this is it is a bit urban, but actually it's definitely a step in the right direction for us to have national guidance on design. I'm delighted that government is listening to it. North Warwickshire, I think, as ever, has been working on this for at least the last 30 years. So we have everything to be proud of here. And, you know, I'm sure Councillor Phillips and myself as design champions will be still working hard at it. But this is important stuff, and it's stuff that we have been doing. So I think we can all be proud of what we've achieved. Members, if no one has any additional comments, I'd move the recommendation that's in front of us.
Second it.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Do we need to vote, Mr. Tobin?
Sure, so given that it's noting only and that the board proposes no steps to be taken, then if there's no objection by any member to it, then it will be taken as read.
Thank you very much. Members, we now move to agenda item 6, which is to exclude public and press for the remaining items of business. I propose the recommendation from the chair. Is there a seconder?
Second. I'll second.
Thank you very much. And again, Ms. Tobin, do we need a vote on that? I think we can just take that as read.
Well, strictly so you do, because it has to be by resolution to exclude the public.
In that case, over to you, Mr. Tobin.
Councillor Bell.
4.
Councillor Clues.
4.
Councillor Deakin.
4.
Councillor Dervitz.
4.
Councillor Hayfield.
4.
Councillor Humphreys.
Sorry, 4.
Councillor Jarvis.
4.
Councillor Lees.
4.
Councillor MacDonald.
4.
Councillor Mawson.
4.
Councillor Moss.
4.
Councillor Parsons.
4.
Councillor Phillips.
4.
Councillor Simpson.
4. That's carried unanimously. And could you just confirm